Society is full of mixed messages because people are full of mixed messages. And to say that these mixed messages make it impossible to know what to do and not do is pretty much the understatement of the century. But one of these areas in which mixed messages creates a huge issue is in the relationship between men and women. I'm going to break down one of these mixed messages for you today, and this time it's going to be a mixed message that women give to men. Let's call it the cry but don't cry dynamic. So many men in society feel angry and oftentimes paralyzed, quite frankly, by the message that they keep getting by women and also by society at large. To cry, but not to cry. To be vulnerable, but don't be vulnerable. To be emotional, but don't be emotional. Throughout history, men have been expected to be tough, rational, strong, unemotional, stoic, etc. Weakness of any kind in a man was not tolerated. Of course, men being pushed and punished into this way of being didn't only lead to good things like protection, leadership, providing, strength, rationality, containment. It also led to things like brutality, control, emotional unavailability, cruelty, coldness, unresponsiveness, and lack of empathy. When women came more into a mentality of taking back their power, a whole lot changed. Now, I can't call this genuine empowerment because when this whole thing started to shift around the 1960s, I mean in a big way, women came into a man's world and gained their power by becoming masculine, not by actually stepping into their feminine empowerment. When this occurred, the polarities flipped. And as a result of this, many men became feminized. Women started to demand that their sons and the men in society became nothing like the men who heard them, or their mothers. This means that women were suddenly faced with an enormous problem. Wanting strength and protection and rationality and leadership and positive ownership and masculinity, but also wanting the safety and closeness that comes from attunement, sensitive response, emotional availability, and the raw, vulnerable truth. But to be honest with you, at this point, when it was obvious that women really needed these two things, it seemed like they were in a lose-lose scenario. Suddenly, women started to feel like they had to choose between one or the other. It began to feel like either a woman could choose a man who is unsafe because though he would protect, provide for, lead, and contain her, he would leave her alone emotionally, be unattuned, unresponsive, cruel, and controlling. Or a woman could choose a man who was unsafe because although he would be emotionally available, sensitive, kind, responsive, and attuned, he would put her in the position to have to fend for herself, protect herself, and be the strong one. Long story short, as a result of all of this, to men, it seems like women are sending a mixed message, because one minute they're saying, no, I want you to get emotional, and then the next minute they're getting upset at you for it. One minute they're like, I need you to be your vulnerable self. The next they're like, God, why can't you just step up and be a man? In other words, it seems like women want a man to be vulnerable, emotional, and also to cry, but at the same time they don't. Alright, so here's how it is, right? Men are looking for one solid answer from women and from society at large, whether they should be vulnerable, should be emotional, and should cry or not. The problem is, they're not going to get that solid answer. Why are they not going to get that solid answer? Because the answer really depends on safety. In general, and this might be the most insulting thing I say in this episode, men in the modern world are pretty unattuned to safety. Now, I'm not just talking about physical unsafety, I'm talking about emotional unsafety. And because of this, what they lack is attunement to context. They lack attunement to timing, situation, and setting. Women, on the other hand, are hyper-attuned to context, hyper-attuned to timing, situation, and setting. Because women, for the most part, are much more attuned to unsafety. To understand about this in depth, watch my video titled What Every Man Needs to Know About Women. So I'm going to hit you with the truth now that's going to make all of this make sense. A woman is going to tell you to be vulnerable, to be emotional, and potentially to even cry, if you doing so makes her feel more safe, given the setting, timing, situation, and therefore context. A woman will get upset with you If you being emotional, vulnerable, or potentially crying makes her more unsafe, given the setting, timing, situation, and therefore context. Context matters. Now, before you think this is just about women, it's not actually. It's also about men. Even men within society are going to get hella upset with you if you are emotional, vulnerable, or cry in a timing, setting, or situation, and therefore context, which makes them more unsafe, you more unsafe, women around you more unsafe, or society itself more unsafe. In other words, men are not going to tolerate this behavior either. To make this make more sense, I'm going to give you an example that's on more of the extreme end of the scale. If a saber-toothed tiger is headed towards a man and a woman, and the man starts crying and expressing how unsafe he feels in the world, the woman is going to feel totally unsafe and get mad at him for doing so. If a man and a woman are struggling because they're not on the same page emotionally or mentally, and the man starts sharing emotionally about the pain of his childhood and how it relates to their relationship, the woman will feel trusted, more intimate, closer, and more secure, therefore safer with him, and be happy that he became vulnerable. Ready for another example of context? A man can hold a newborn infant and in doing so be very gentle and soft and kind and emotionally available and even cry without being seen as weak or losing his strength or masculinity. It is so much about timing, situation, and setting, and therefore context. What makes this process of discerning when becoming emotional or becoming vulnerable or even crying makes a woman feel safer versus more unsafe so difficult is that in the modern world, unsafety is a lot more complex. In other words, danger is a lot more covert than overtly obvious. For example, in the modern world, a woman usually is experiencing a lot less containment by the man she's in a relationship with. Women today feel a lot more like they have to fend for themselves, and society in fact congratulates them for doing so, as if it's a really good thing that you can fend for yourself. So a lot of women have this pressure of feeling unsafe actually just in the modern world in general, because there's no longer anything providing an umbrella for them. There's no containment. As a result of this actually, a woman oftentimes in the modern world responds even more poorly to a man becoming vulnerable, emotional, or even crying, because the minute he does that, it feels like she's even more alone to fend for herself. And not only that, she may even have to take the pressure of his emotional well-being too. Not just her own, and the household, and the job, and, yeah. To understand more about this in depth, you can watch my video titled Containment, What a Woman Needs from a Man in a Relationship. To sum up this idea, in the modern world there may be a lot of elements that are not overtly obvious that are in fact making a woman feel unsafe, and you're not even perceiving it. Challenging or not though, men really need to develop this ability to understand the context, the timing, setting, and situation that will make it so that either him becoming vulnerable, emotional, or crying makes her feel more unsafe or more safe. And women, now that you've become aware of this mixed message that you're sending, you need to become much more aware of where you are relative to safety or unsafety, relative to a man being emotional, vulnerable, or crying. Therefore, you can clearly and directly communicate to help him learn timing, setting, situation, and context. I do have to issue a warning, though, relative to this video, because women vary, and there are definitely shades of dysfunction. There's shades of dysfunction both in women who are repulsed by a man being vulnerable and potentially crying or being emotional, just like there are actually shades of dysfunction in a woman who loves it when a man is that way. For example, some women are traumatized to the degree that they have a solid cultural association with a man ever being emotional or crying and a man being weak, which thus makes them feel unsafe. This solid association may make them interpret unsafety or weakness where it does not actually exist. Or, for example, to the opposite extreme, a woman's wires could have been totally crossed. In this scenario, a woman who's been traumatized in her childhood by having less power than her cruel father, for example, could partially love it when a man is being emotional or crying because it makes him smaller and weaker than she is, and therefore she feels more powerful than he is, and thus safer than she felt in her childhood. Now, interestingly enough, when a woman is not being given containment regardless of what her childhood looks like, she's still not going to be functioning okay. So what it would look like in these women is a split between the part of her that's frustrated she's not getting these, containment elements within a man and these strong masculine traits, but at the same time, she's reveling in how small he is compared to her because it means she's never going to get hurt again. The bottom line here is, if you are a man, in order to get out of this confusion and in order to get the reflection that what you're doing is right in the situation at hand, you've got to have attunement as to whether or not your vulnerability in any moment makes a woman more unsafe or safer. This is a real level of attunement to master, but I'm going to tell you something. The mastery of this level of attunement to context is a very big element of divine masculine, and therefore to come into your divine masculine power, this level of attunement is something that you need to develop. A man who is genuinely in his masculine energy understands that vulnerability only becomes weakness and is only unsafe at certain times and in certain situations and settings. In other settings, vulnerability is strength and creates safety. A woman wants a man who is strong, not a man who is weak. But a man crying, a man being emotional, a man being vulnerable does not in and of itself imply weakness. What turns that vulnerability into weakness is when a man does that in the wrong context, in the wrong situation, setting, or timing. Being vulnerable, being emotional, or potentially even crying, has the capacity to make a woman feel safer in a situation, and thus make you as a man seem stronger. Therefore, when it comes to being emotional, being vulnerable, or even crying, context really is everything. Have a good day. If you liked this video, be sure to share it, like it, and also subscribe to my channel so you can see more content like this. But I want to personally thank you for taking the initiative and having the bravery to step into the space of awareness, not only for yourself, but for the benefit of those around you.